much, Kate, for that kind intro. Excuse me, I'm delighted to be here. One of the cool things about speaking at a university is you get multiple chances to spend time with students and faculty. And yesterday in Bloomington, I had a full day of meeting and talking with folks, both from the Environmental Resilience Institute, but also across the school. It was fantastic. The local organization, Concerned Scientists at IU, doing fantastic work there as well. So it's been a great couple of days, a whirlwind couple of days, but it's fun to be up here and indeed. I've already had some great conversations with some awesome faculty, some super smart students, so I'm delighted to be here, so thanks very much. And the reason I'm here is because last summer I did a thing, and that's what Gabe was referring to. Some of you may be aware of it, and I'll talk a little bit about that. That thing caused kind of stir. But before I talk about the thing, I kind of want to talk about consequences and culture. So I'm going to sort of format this as a performance in 3 acts, because I want to start with Act 1, and I'll call that consequences. Act 2 will be the thing, and then Act 3 I'll call overcome. I'm not sure, but you guys give me a better name if you want when we get to it. But first, and I don't have to say this here, but I'm gonna anyway, because I always like to let everyone know exactly where I'm coming from the very beginning. It's generally in a more mixed audience, but the scientific consensus on climate change, right? That it's real, it's happening, it's very dangerous, and humans are responsible. And this has been unequivocally demonstrated, not just, even the Trump administration released the first chapter of the National Climate Assessment saying all those things, but multiple lines of evidence all confirm that there is no other way to explain the amount and the rate of change right now unless you consider human activity. So that's a scientific consensus, and you all get that. It's not a thing you believe in. We see that a lot in the media now. Do you believe in climate change? It's not like a god or a religion. It just is, right? You don't have to believe in gravity, but if you trip, you're going to fall down. Right? That's just how it goes. So I don't believe in climate change. I just know that it's happening. That being established, there's a lot of political rhetoric around climate change. So I always like to also say in the beginning, this is not going to be a partisan talk. People wonder how that can possibly be. Certainly the Republican Party has been stoking falsehoods around climate, not just climate change, but race and sexism and immigration and so on. I don't think we can assume that both parties are doing that to the same degree. GOP has been a kind of willing host. But there are a lot of Republicans, moderate Republicans, who don't feel that way, and I don't like to tar everybody with the same brush, so I just always put that disclaimer up front as well, that I don't intend to just be painting with the same brush. I'm going to talk about science and ethics and what I think is best for American health and safety. But in the process, of course, I'm going to excoriate some extremist things in the White House. They're enablers in Congress who are bent on gutting the role of science and policy. They're disregarding ethical norms, and in the process, they're putting more Americans at risk. And this is not necessarily a Republican thing or a conservative thing, right? These are extremists and ideologues. So I'm not saying. So that's what I mean by this is not going to be a partisan speech, because I think a lot of Republicans would agree with me on those points. But what often gets lost in all this polarized talk about climate change is that we have friends and family and places that are suffering right now, right? That the American economy and American health and safety are being neglected right now. Even sort of our unique natural history, our cultural history are being neglected right now. And we're hearing more about it. There are these disasters and extreme weather events that are kind of opening some eyes to what's going on, but there are also these slow-moving disasters and impacts on cultures and traditions that are generally out of sight of most Americans. So that brings us to Act 1, consequences. I'm a long way from home. I'm from Maine. Anybody from Maine here? Okay. Sometimes you just see a hand pop up. And our state motto is Dirigo. It's Latin for I lead, and it's referring to the North Star on the state flag, like which I didn't know as a kid, by the way. I was sort of surprised that I thought it was just Mainers like to lead. But it's referring to the North Star. The Norse call it the Lone Star. The medieval mariners call it Stella Maris. The Arab mariners called it very prominent. It's always been prominent in northern civilizations. Even Shakespeare wrote about the North Star, called it "the one and all doth hold his place." I think it was in Julius Caesar. So an important celestial body for us. We frequently refer to things using the North Star as metaphor, as in ethics should be the North Star of government, or science should be the North Star of policy. And I raise this not for the obvious reasons, but because the North Star is also very important for the cultures and the people of the far north, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. In Inuktitut, which is the Inuit language of Canada, it's called Nuksuituk, which refers to their elders, the wisdom and leadership of their elders. They use the North Star as a guide, as many cultures do. But the North Star is pretty much the only constant in the Arctic right now. Right now, everything else is transforming before our eyes. In many ways, it's creating innumerable dilemmas for the people who live there, right, in the Arctic region, who depend on those resources and on that place. And we think we have it bad here in the lower 48, and we do. Unpredictable weather extremes, sea level rise, flash floods here in Indiana. I know flash flooding and floods in general are an issue, inundation. But the Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. So you can just imagine all of it. Just imagine everything accelerated again, times 2. That's what they're facing. And it's a rate of change that no humans have ever experienced before, rate of climate change. And you've probably heard about, I think most of you are very well versed in these things, but sea ice extent is setting record lows. Every year we have these warm temperature anomalies in the Arctic that I'm not sure when you stop calling them anomalies, because almost every winter there is a warm temperature occurrence that sits in the Arctic and is remarkable. Last winter, it was over 32 degrees, so it was above freezing in the northernmost observing station north of Greenland. So there was not only melting ice, but it was open water. Last February, you could have sailed also through the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Sea in February, which is just remarkable. And it's shocking. The regional scientists who've been tracking this stuff for a long time, and obviously it has big implications beyond the Arctic region, and we can talk about that during the Q&A if you want, but there are certainly implications. But of course, for the Alaska Natives, who I'll be talking about, it presents an existential threat to their way of life. Each village in the Arctic has its own culture, its own distinct traditions and practices, and often a distinct language or dialect, right? And I frequently say that it's not a stretch, that each of these villages punches way above its weight in terms of the contribution to global cultural diversity. It's really, really remarkable. A single village of 200 to 500 people can be so distinct that it contributes more than some countries to cultural diversity. And this is true around the circumpolar Arctic. I'll be talking about the Alaska Natives, but Inuit cultures of Chukotka in Russia, across Alaska into Canada and Greenland, the Aleut of the Bering Sea, Athabascans in Gwich'in in North America, the Sami reindeer herders in Northern Europe, and other reindeer herder cultures across northern Russia. So there are a lot of cultures in the Arctic, and they're all experiencing this rapid change. And I'm always amazed because they persisted through millennia of change in an extremely harsh environment. Their resilience is remarkable. I mean, what they've gone through and adapted to, their institute, their indigenous knowledge is absolutely stunning. Their relationship with time and solitude and climate and ecosystems is something really special. I consider them the planet's foremost Arctic experts. I know there are a lot of Arctic scientists who may dispute that, but I really do. I think that indigenous knowledge is priceless. But even they have not seen this rate of change before. Humans have, as I noted, and their resilience is not just compromised by the rate of change, but the actions of non-indigenous actors in the Arctic who have constrained their lifestyles as well. So they're on the brink of being wiped right off the map, which is something I was working on quite a lot while I was in Ontario. I'll get into that later, but in Alaska, we have villages that, through no fault of their own, are situated in some of the most vulnerable places on Earth. I mean, these are islands, narrow barrier islands or spits of land, peninsulas, that face directly out to the Bering and Chukchi Seas. Once upon a time, sea ice that would set up. So it wasn't a particularly threatening, it was a harsh, but not particularly threatening environment in terms of the fierce storms that would come in the fall. And of course, that's no longer true. The permafrost is melting out from beneath their feet and their houses, and the sea ice doesn't set up. I think last winter it was well into December before the sea ice set up off the barrel. So it's things are changing super fast, and it's altering everything that they do. And for over 10 years now, the federal government has even acknowledged that these are unsafe places to live. And several of these villages have taken the very difficult step of voting to relocate, which they understand could completely compromise their cultural continuity. So very difficult times, and unfortunately the Trump administration has completely ignored these interests. And I think for two reasons. One, the Trump administration is not particularly friendly to American Indian or Alaska Native rights and sovereignty. Over and over they've taken actions to demonstrate that, but also their situation in the Arctic kind of puts the lie to their whole kind of climate denying nonsense. So it's just sort of a living reminder to them of this falsehood that they're hiding behind. So these Alaska Natives are on the front lines. Climate change, they're in danger. This is real deal, life or death stuff. You know, this is happening before their eyes, and it's all because of these well-financed delay tactics back in D.C. and New York and elsewhere. And you know, they're talking about something that these folks experience every day with all five senses, right? I mean, they can they feel the permafrost turning to mud beneath their feet, beneath their homes, right? They can taste the spoiled whale meat because they usually would store it in these ice cellars, and those ice cellars are no longer ice, right? So their whale and seal meat is spoiled. They can hear the din from these big packs of herds of walrus that haul up on shore now because there's no sea ice to haul up on, so they have to watch out because you get anywhere near that, it can cause a fatal stampede. They can smell the fumes, the exhaust from ships that are sailing along shores that were not passable most of the year in the past. And they can see open ocean during the season when there normally would be ice that would buffer them from the storms and the seas. So foremost experts in the Arctic, all their senses are telling them that they're in danger, and all of this is falling on deaf ears in Washington. So this brings me to Act 2, which is the thing I did. As Gabe mentioned, I was at Interior for it was about 7 years, and I was running the policy office there in the office of the Secretary. I was the top climate policy advisor, and for those of you that aren't familiar with Interior, every bureau at Interior has assets and equities that are threatened by climate change. The impacts of climate change are absolutely essential to the mission of the National Park Service for obvious reasons, Fish and Wildlife Service, trying to conserve biodiversity and manage wildlife refuges, the U.S. Geological Survey, the science that they do, where they do it, and how they do it, and the Bureau of Land Management. You know, DOI together, the bureaus manage 20% of the American land mass. So at Interior, you're addressing the climate impacts of 20% of the American land mass. So there's no question that climate change, adaptation, and resilience have to be important issues there. And I would speak very publicly about this, particularly as it relates to these Alaska Natives threatened by climate impacts. And I think most people know that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is at Interior. So Interior is the federal trustee for American Indians and Alaska Natives. So the well-being of tribes is essential and core to the mission at Interior, or should be, right? And, you know, everyone had a different reaction to the election, the presidential election. But despite all the anti-climate rhetoric, I thought, well, gosh, we're dealing with impacts. This is, you know, I'd hate to work at the EPA right now, but we work on climate change adaptation, resilience, things that you can see right in front of you. This should be, you know, we'll still be able to do that work. And then obviously I was naive and completely wrong. I had vastly overestimated the integrity and the maturity of the incoming politicals of the Trump administration. And what came next, well, you saw it, you're seeing it now, right? It's an all-out assault on the rules and the policies and the procedures previous administration had done, for that matter. It was like being led by a gang of fifth grade bullies that are embarrassed about their grades. It just, and you know, I used to say eighth grade. I don't know. Every time I give a talk, I think I just dial it back. But and it continues to be an embarrassing performance from the political appointees there. At any rate, you know, I think of their goals as three-part goals. One is to erase the Obama administration, reverse everything they did during the Obama administration, good or bad, doesn't matter, just get rid of it. Marginalize the scientists and experts. This relates to the work that you all do. And then shrink and hobble the federal agencies. That allows them, makes it easier to hand the keys over to industry, at least in the agencies that I was familiar with, right? Interior, EPA, and so on. These are the agencies that are looking out for health and safety, and that was not helpful to them. The approach they're taking, though, is a very ham-fisted approach. They're taking these wild swings at all the policies and rules and laws that protect our health and safety and natural resources and so on. So they're going after it. The only saving grace, of course, is they're not very good at it. They're just not very good at it. They're swinging wildly and too soon without using due process. They've already lost 25 times in court. Right? So this deregulation agenda is hobbled by the fact that they're not particularly skilled at it. But some of the blows are landing. Pardon me. One of them was aimed at the Senior Executive Service. That's the SES at Interior. That's the sort of executive core of high-level employees who are meant to be deployed wherever an agency needs high-level but non-political expertise. So still career ranks, not political appointees, but they need executives in those positions. There are about 220 of us. There were at DOI, and DOI is an agency of about 70,000 people. So in every administration, when they come in, they move a few of these senior executives around. Sometimes they're threatened by a couple of individuals that may have been effective during the previous administration, but no agency has ever come in any administration and moved dozens of senior executives all at one time, one night, by email, with the obvious intent, many of us believe, to get us to quit, to dislodge us entirely from the civil service. So to do this, they move people into jobs that were completely unrelated to their area of expertise. They moved a lot of people across the country, could have been from Alaska to DC, very extreme moves. They didn't talk to anyone beforehand. No one knew it was coming. Most of these people had families, many of them were retirement age, and a very disproportionate number of them were American Indians. So they just checked all the boxes for things you just don't do in the workplace management setting. But then Secretary Ryan Zinke, who was the only Senate confirmed employee there at DOI at the time, went up to the Hill to testify on the budget, and he said that yes, indeed, he intended to use reassignments and other means to trim the workforce at DOI by about 4,000 people. So reassignments don't trim the workforce. I don't know if he realized what he was saying there. They only trim the workforce if you get those people to quit. And while you can absolutely reassign senior executives, even involuntarily, you can't do that with the intent to get them to quit. So he was essentially confessing an unlawful strategy to Congress that day. And hopefully there could be a change in Congress soon that might bring that back to light. But at any rate, I was clearly on their list of people they wanted out. I say that because they moved me. I was the climate policy advisor, as I mentioned. They moved me to the office that collects and disperses royalty income from the oil and gas and mining companies, right? So it wasn't as though they were being subtle here. They were just really trying to get me to go. That'll come back and bite them at some point. And it was clear in my mind that it was retaliation for my work, very focused on convincing them they should be addressing the climate impacts on Alaskan natives. I actually really liked the folks in the new office I was moved to. They were great people. They were auditors. I know nothing about auditing. I didn't have a position description. They started trying to train me and take me to the offices, and so for a couple of months I tried to give it a go, but ultimately, it's a waste of my salary. It's a waste of all the training dollars. It's just bad governance to do that, and so I ultimately resigned about a year ago. of dollars and resources toward these communities that need to be relocated and to get them out of harm's way. So that's, the crime in my view is that climate change is not a policy debate for these folks up there, right? I mean, this is an existential threat in some cases. It could be a life or death thing. They're being completely ignored by the executive branch now, and that continues to this day. So I found an employment attorney because I had no idea what to do when I was reassigned. I learned about the Whistleblower Protection Act and the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. I think everybody should know about these things. I think the law students probably are pretty familiar with them. But most federal employees are not as familiar as they ought to be with these things. I learned my rights. I lodged an official whistleblower complaint with the Office of Special Counsel. I also took the unusual step that my attorney wasn't crazy about, of going public about it with an op-ed in the Washington Post. And that instantly made me the first public whistleblower of the Trump administration. So that was the thing I did. And it led to quite a stir, a little bit more than I was anticipating. I don't think I had any idea what I was getting into until as soon as the op-ed was published in the online version, I got a call from NPR, and I knew I was going to be in trouble because at that point, I had to just stop answering the phone and to do whatever interviews I could, but keep my eye on the ball, which was exposing abuses that we hoped they would not do again. There were other interesting reactions. America's top legal scholars in this area, led by I didn't know any of this. Those of you here in the law school will know their names. I don't have them. It's in my tongue, but some very prominent law scholars got together and submitted a letter on my behalf to the Office of Special Counsel saying this is dangerously close to politicizing the civil service, and that's a big no-no. There are reasons for that in our democracy. So the legal community came out in support. The Senate was very supportive. On the Democrat side, they all signed a letter to the Inspector General of Interior and said, hey, this smells kind of bad. What's going on with this? Please do an investigation. And so that took place. The Inspector General report came out actually just this last spring, and it said, yes, indeed, they did everything wrong. They stacked the review board for senior executives with just political appointees. They demonstrated retaliation. They demonstrated discrimination. But they couldn't remember. They asked them, why did you reassign these people? What were your criteria? They made a couple of excuses. But the IG went back and looked, and none of those things took place. So they said, okay, why really did you move these people? Because your criteria turned out to be false. And they said, oh, we don't remember. So it was an easy matter for them to kind of wiggle out of this. And because there was no paper trail at all, the IG said we can't hold them legally accountable. So thankfully, there's still the whistleblower complaint is still under investigation. And again, an oversight process, if the House should flip, would probably reveal some more helpful information there. But that's kind of how things went down. To my dad, it was just, well, you caused quite a stir. So it was definitely, in Maine, they noticed this stuff. But I always quote from Roy Disney. So Walt Disney's underappreciated brother Roy once said, when values are clear, decision-making is easy. And to me, this was a no-brainer. Right? I mean, it was obvious what needed to happen. This wasn't a difficult decision to make. I don't think it was even particularly courageous. It was just an obvious move to make. They'd already taken my job, so I didn't have much to lose. I still had my voice, and I wanted to use it. So, I don't have regrets. It's just appalling to me, really, that these political leaders are putting profit over safety day after day. And it's putting Americans and American resources and the American economy at risk. They're trying to break down the agencies that they put in charge of leading, and that's a very extreme thing to be doing. That's why I call them extremists and ideologues. They're well beyond the usual political spectrum in the U.S. And we had, Pruitt, of course, you remember, but even Secretary Zinke, they're just ethically challenged, right? I mean, in my view, they've abandoned the use of science in policy making. They completely ignore it. They've disregarded all these ethical norms, and they, in my view, they have desecrated the notion of public service. I don't even think they are trying to serve America and Americans. I really think that they are simply trying to break government. And the Alaska Natives are just one example of the consequences of this, as we discussed in Act 1. And these complicated issues around relocating villages or managed retreat or dislocation, which is when you're forced out by conditions, you can't go back. These things are going to happen elsewhere with no handle the relocation of the village of Shishmaref in Alaska doesn't have implications for Miami Beach or Galveston, Texas, or Boston Harbor, or any of these places, right? And in each case, it's very clear that the poorest among us bear the greatest burden, almost exclusively. We saw this in Houston, we saw this in Puerto Rico last year. This is not a new phenomenon, but it's certainly going to be happening a lot more. Just because of this report came out last spring, I expand the geography of this a little bit to say that the Department of Defense funded a study last year, or that was published early this year by the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And the title of it was something along the lines of many low-lying atolls in the Pacific will be uninhabitable by mid-century. So it may seem obscure, but these are the island states, like the Marshall Islands and Micronesia, Palau, and others, that have been some of the most vocal voices during the UN climate talks. Very strong voices because they are going to have to leave their homeland completely. Where are they going to find sovereignty? Where are they going to find cultural continuity? And they just found out with the publication of that report, they cut their time in half. They thought they had until the end of the century before sea level rise would overcome them, but people hadn't studied aquifer inundation, and that was what this study revealed, is actually you won't have any drinking water by mid-century, so you'll have to leave those atolls. And to pile on, of course, the Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs and Interior is the federal official in the U.S. responsible for supporting many of these island atoll states, right? Marshall Islands and Micronesia and so on are part of this Compact of Free Association, so they get their postal services and medical services and their hazard mitigation services and support from the U.S. and this official in Interior is responsible for that. That official, this guy named Doug Domenech, is a Koch brothers protege. He's been working very clearly. His decision-making has been serving his former employers and his lobbying clients. And he hasn't reacted yet to the study from last April, which has dramatic implications for his entire portfolio. And he hasn't responded. In fact, Secretary Zinke was the head of U.S. delegation to the Pacific Islands Forum last month and didn't bring up climate change. So the Pacific Islands Forum is all about climate change. It is their number one concern. And he goes and he leads the U.S. delegation. He's like, you guys are important for national security. And that was all he had to say. So very, very embarrassing what's happening there. And so whether it's the Alaska Natives, the Marshall Islanders, or poor communities in Houston, or Puerto Rican communities, urgency levels going through the roof. Scientists are sounding the alarms very loudly. And the Trump administration has made a clear choice to ignore those alarms. So before you guys all slick your wrists, I'm going to get to Act 3, which I call Overcome, because this is an extremely depressing thing to be talking about. But some good things are happening, right? I mean, civil society is pushing back in a few ways, and I'll give you a few examples. First off, thank you, because academia is one of them. Information and support that the federal government is not now providing, or it's suppressing, whether it's science or legal support or other things that are not coming from the federal community, and those experts are being marginalized. Academia is providing that in a lot of cases. I'm now, as Gabe mentioned, a senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, where we're looking into Arctic policy, Arctic science. We're doing a horizon scan to find out what are the things we're going to need to tackle going forward. So I know that we're not the only institution doing that. So even just the Arctic region alone, there are lots of institutions stepping up with the information and science that we need. So thank you for doing that, and please continue, because that's absolutely essential. The Environmental Resilience Institute at IU in Bloomington, and here, I think, through this prediction solution communication model is doing that very thing in many different places, but particularly with a focus on Indiana. So the role of academia in problem solving is absolutely essential. And it can, at times, substitute, if need be, for the federal enterprise when it advocates that stuff. NGOs, non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, like Union of Concerned Scientists, are also stepping into the breach. I'm a senior fellow with UCS, as Gabe mentioned, and I've been absolutely impressed with the energy, the enthusiasm, and just the effectiveness of these really smart people that are out there daylighting and tracking all of the scientific integrity and ethics issues out there that need to be addressed, and with some issue-focused stuff as well. Really important. I don't think we've ever seen an administration try to undercut science so blatantly as this one. So organizations like that are essential. And of course, the concerned scientists at Indiana University are doing super work on that front as well. I've been meeting a lot of those folks and very impressed. Then I'm going to go on a quick tangent because in the context of all this, there's a federal statute that has been worth its weight in gold. The Freedom of Information Act has started to generate the kind of information that we just could not get out of this administration for the first year or so. They've already set records for non-transparency. The Trump administration has already not released more documents than any administration in history. So, they're not even 2 years in. It's pretty amazing. But journalists and NGOs and whistleblowers like me and other organizations have been submitting these FOIA requests, and these disclosures, the document disclosures, have been fascinating, horrifying, but fascinating. We've learned a lot about what's going on behind closed doors, whether it's Secretary Zinke, it turns out, did lie about why he cut the Bears Ears National Monument in half. We know that his press secretary did refer to a journalist with an expletive, in these emails that are going around. Certainly there were a lot of things discovered about Scott Pruitt before his crash and burn situation. UCS, a FOIA from UCS found that the White House and the EPA colluded to suppress some information about an important and dangerous chemical. They didn't want to release it because they were afraid it would be a PR nightmare. So American health and safety wasn't apparently on the list, right? These things are happening. We're learning about it because of this law. So just a little shout out to the Freedom of Information Act. Because there's a third group that I want to talk about in this section. I've already mentioned them, but I want to get back to it. Because the executive branch is hostile, Congress is inert, but somehow these agencies, hobbled as they are still chugging along and advancing their missions, even to some degree, they're still at it. And the reason for that is the heart and soul of the federal enterprise is still plugging away in the trenches. And I'm referring to the civil service. These folks are still on the job, remarkably. These are the people, these are scientists, experts, the institutional knowledge holders that make the agencies tick. They're the ones that kind of keeping democracy on the tracks right now. And it's impressive work, but for the most part, they have no voice right now. They have no influence over decision making. They're not at the table. Their work has been completely devalued, particularly the science work. And many of them face that decision every day that I face, which is today the day I'm going to raise my hand and say, no, this is not right? Or is today the day I'm going to chuck it back and keep working for another day? Because if I don't, if I'm not here, no one else will do this work. So I respect the decision whichever way they go. I sort of imagined a lot of other people would be blowing the whistle by now, but I understand why they don't, because someone has to be doing the work. So, and I still hear from these folks even a year later, all the time. I get emails from people I don't know saying, thank you for being the voice that we don't have. It inspires us to keep going. And that's one of the reasons I really like working with Union of Concerned Scientists, because that's an organization that's doing the same thing. They're standing up for and speaking out for the scientists and experts that are under attack right now. Excuse me. So everything we can do to support them now is absolutely essential. And maybe during the Q&A we can talk about you becoming them at some point. We need to know more about what they're going through. So I try and have these conversations with folks. They're very shy about speaking with reporters still. But UCS just did a survey. They sent a survey out to 61,000 or so federal scientists saying, okay, what are you going through? Here's some questions. And the results were horrifying in many ways, or at least very grim, but it'll help us better support these folks and protect them from some of these abuses. It's clear that they are working in extremely understaffed situations. Their budgets are being squeezed. The political appointees are getting in their business. They're affecting the science that's being done. They're questioning their work, and they're just sidelining these guys. And it's just a tough spot to be in. A lot of them are leaving. Some of them are retiring. Others are quitting at it. But hopefully enough of them are staying to keep things going along so far. mentioned earlier that the Trump administration's deregulation agenda will be largely rolled back, I think, I hope. There'll be some things that get through, but they're so clumsy and they're losing in court constantly. But this institutional damage to the civil service is another thing entirely, and much harder to repair, and it will take years. And we're going to be absolutely dependent upon the existing federal workforce to help it rebound. So, at any rate, the system hobbled as it is by these liars and these extremists. I don't hedge my words, obviously, but that's how a lot of people are seeing it now. It's still functioning, the system is functioning in some instances, but we need to put science and ethics back in the policy-making seat. I can't say enough about how important it is, the work of organizations like UCS or the contributions of academia and the legal community. Absolutely essential to all of this. And before I conclude, I do want to get back to the Inuit meeting for the North Star, right, which is wisdom and leadership and guidance. And I don't know, I find it striking that there's this unchanging beacon hanging up there in the north that has for millennia symbolized these qualities that are so scarce right now in the public domain. And so maybe rather than just representing those qualities, I'm starting to think of the North Star as a reminder that those qualities are permanent in the human condition and the human spirit, that we've got these tools because they're absolutely essential to navigating this darkness. So, and I can just really use that assurance. So I look at the North Star now a little bit differently than I used to. I think of it as that reminder. I look at it with a little more yearning and a little bit of hope. And I hope that other people can do, because I hope that during this social churning, this horrible social churning that's going on here right now, some form of civic responsibility will emerge to inform what we're doing and provide the wisdom and leadership necessary to just navigate through this dark storm. And it'll be necessary to save cultures, I described earlier, to save lives, and to save the natural places that all of the above depend upon, right? And I did read your state song and your state poem. You guys love nature. It's all you're all about here in Indiana, so that's a thing. So it is important. We need to get busy. Let's get busy, as we say in Maine, dare to go.